Black water churns in a sunless void. Here, in the final hour of night, existence teeters on the edge of total collapse.
To preserve the universe, its creator must undergo a terrifying transformation. He must die.
This is the nightly sacrifice of the Sun King.
Welcome to Somnolent. Ra is far more than a golden disk. He is the architect of survival, a god whose eternal cycle defines the very essence of the Egyptian soul.
Before the first sunrise, before the pulse of the Nile, there was only the stillness of the abyss. To understand the weight of the solar journey, we must look back to a time when time itself did not exist. This was the noon. It was an infinite expanse of dark, stagnant water, not a void of nothingness, but a reservoir of raw, unformed potential. This was the primordial chaos, a silent ocean stretching into an eternity of shadow. There was no wind to ripple the surface, no sound to break the heavy air, and no consciousness to witness the deep. In this submerged world, everything was one, and nothing had yet been named. Within this liquid gloom, a single point of intention began to stir. It was not a creator born of a mother and father, but a consciousness that simply decided to be. Out of the depths of the noon, the first solid ground broke through the surface. This was the Benben, a primordial mound shaped like a pyramid, rising from the waters to catch the first flicker of possibility. It stood as a lonely island in the dark, the center of all things to come. And upon this mound, the divine light materialized. This was the autogenesis of Ra. He did not arrive through biology. He spoke his own secret name, and in that utterance, he brought himself into being. He was the golden spark that shattered the eternal night, the first presence to define here against nowhere. As Ra emerged, his radiance did not just bring visibility, it brought structure. This transition from the formless waters to the structured light birthed the defining tension of the Egyptian universe. This is the struggle between Ma'at and Isfet. Ma'at is the immutable law of order, truth, and cosmic balance. It is the rhythmic beating of a heart, the predictable flooding of a river, and the straight path of the sun across the sky. Isfet is its opposite, the encroaching shadow of the noon, the entropy that seeks to dissolve the world back into the chaotic soup from which it rose. To the ancient mind, this was not merely a philosophical debate, it was the fundamental physics of existence. Every action, every thought, and every movement of the stars was a battle to uphold Ma'at against the gravity of Isfet. The universe was not a clock wound once and left to run. It was a fragile construct that required constant maintenance and divine vigilance. Ra became the ultimate arbiter of this balance. His very existence was an act of defiance against the silence of the abyss. By simply being, by moving through the sky, he pinned the chaotic waters down and carved out a space where life could take root. The Benben stone became the prototype for every temple and every pyramid, a physical reminder that the world rose from the dark. But the noon did not disappear. It remained at the edges of the map, a constant pressure pushing against the borders of reality. The sun was the only force capable of holding back that tide. This established the high stakes of the Sun King's voyage. His survival was synonymous with the survival of logic over madness. If the light were to fail, the waters would rush back in, and the memory of the world would be swallowed by the same stillness that preceded the first dawn. This tension is where our story truly begins, at the intersection of the light that creates and the darkness that waits to reclaim it. The darkness did not retreat willingly. It clung to the edges of the first sunrise, a heavy, suffocating pressure that demanded a counterforce. Ra, standing at the center of the void, understood that light alone was not enough to hold back the nothingness. He needed structure. He needed a lineage. In the silence of the primordial waters, the Sun King began the work of the first architect. He did not look outward for materials, for there was nothing but the dark. Instead, he reached into the furnace of his own essence. With a great sneeze and a deliberate expulsion of breath, he brought forth the first twins of creation. Shu, the spirit of the wind and the dry air, and Tefnut, the goddess of moisture and corrosive heat. This was the first division of the one into the many. It was the moment the universe gained its first breath and its first drop of dew. These two beings were the pillars of a new reality. They wandered into the shadows of the Nun, exploring the reaches of the unknown, until Ra sent his singular, all-seeing eye to bring them home. When they returned, the Sun King wept. Those tears, falling upon the fresh, raw soil of the emerging world, transformed into the first human beings. We were born not from a plan, but from the relief of a father finding his lost children. But the family was not yet complete. From the union of air and moisture came Geb, the solid earth, and Nut, the arched violet of the sky. In those earliest days, the earth and sky were inseparable. They lay in a perpetual, lightless embrace, leaving no room for the sun to move or for life to flourish. The world was a cramped, dark womb. Ra, seeing that growth required space, issued his first royal decree. He commanded Shu to step between his children. With the strength of the gale, Shu lifted Nut high above his head, stretching her body across the vacuum until her fingers touched one horizon and her toes touched the other. Geb was pushed down, flattening into the plains and heaving up into the peaks. This was the great separation. For the first time, there was a horizon, there was a path, there was a world. Ra now sat atop a divine hierarchy, the undisputed patriarch of the Ennead. This council of gods, the air, the water, the earth, and the sky, were not just his children, they were the extensions of his will. This was the dawn of the Zep Tepi, the golden age when the gods walked the earth alongside men. There was no concept of a distant heaven, because the divine was present in every breeze and every clod of dirt. Ra was the great-grandfather, the solar pharaoh whose golden skin illuminated the very laws he had written into the stars. Under his absolute rule, the cycle of the seasons began to pulse like a slow, steady drumbeat. The chaos of the Nun was kept at bay by the sheer weight of Ra's presence. He was the anchor of existence, the singular point of light around which all things revolved. In this era of perfection, the Sun King's voyage was not yet a struggle against the night, but a triumphant procession across a sky that he had built with his own hands. The hierarchy was established, the roles were defined, and the voyage was underway, moving with a confidence that suggested this brilliance might last forever. The throne of the sun was secure, and the laws of Ma'at, order, balance, and truth, flowed from Ra as naturally as the light itself, binding the gods and the earth in a single, unshakable design.
The laws of Ma'at were not merely abstract principles whispered in the halls of the gods, they were the heartbeat of a living civilization. And in those earliest days, the boundary between the heavens and the earth was a thin veil, easily crossed by the divine. Ra did not rule from a distant cold void. He descended to the banks of the Nile, trading his cosmic splendor for the weight of a physical crown, becoming the first true pharaoh of Egypt. This was the Golden Age, an era where the sun did not just shine upon the world, but walked within it.
Imagine a landscape where the ruler was not a man claiming divine right, but divinity itself standing upon the dark, fertile silt. His palace was the first ever built, a structure of gold and cedar that mirrored the architecture of the stars, standing as a beacon in the center of a young world. To the people of this primordial Egypt, the king was the source of all vitality. When he spoke, the river rose in a predictable, life-giving flood. When he looked upon the fields, the grain grew heavy and golden, mimicking the hue of his own skin. This was the era of the Zep Tepi, the first time, when the presence of the Creator was as tangible as the heat on one's shoulders. There was no separation between the political and the spiritual. To serve the pharaoh was to serve the sun, and to maintain the irrigation canals was an act of cosmic devotion. As the dawn broke each morning over the limestone cliffs of the east, the nature of Ra's governance took on a mobile, magnificent form. He would board the Manjet, the boat of millions of years. This was his solar vessel for the daylight hours, a shimmering bark crafted from the purest light and celestial iron. It was more than a ship. It was a cosmic chariot that navigated the ocean of the sky. The Egyptians watched its progress with a reverence that dictated the rhythm of their entire lives. To see the Manjet rise was to know that the king had once again triumphed over the heavy silence of the night. Its prow sliced through the morning mist, pushing aside the remnants of chaos so that the day could begin in earnest. The white hull of the Manjet represented the purity of the morning, a vessel of hope that carried the weight of the entire world's existence on its deck. This was the hour of Ra Harakti, the name given to the sun as it conquered the horizon. This identity was a profound fusion, a theological masterstroke that blended the ancient sun god with the celestial falcon, Horus. In this form, Ra Harakti was depicted with the head of a hawk, crowned by the solar disk and the protective coiled cobra known as the uraeus. The falcon's keen sight represented the all-seeing nature of the king. Just as a hawk circles high above the desert, observing the smallest movement in the scrubland below, Ra Harakti watched over his kingdom with an eye that nothing could escape. This syncretism signaled a shift in how the people perceived their world. The sun was no longer just a brilliant light, it was a vigilant eye, a cosmic guardian who saw every act of justice and every hidden transgression. The horizon was not a limit or a boundary, but a gateway, a sacred space where the king entered and exited the world of the living to maintain the balance of the universe.
For the laborer lifting water from the Nile, or the scribe recording the harvest, the golden sphere moving through the blue vault above was not a ball of fire or a distant celestial object. It was the literal, physical body of their king. When the sun scorched the earth at midday, the people felt the overwhelming intensity of his power. When the gentle amber light of late afternoon bathed the temples, they felt his mercy and his satisfaction. The sun's rays were seen as his golden arms reaching down from the Manjet to touch the heads of his subjects, offering the gift of life through warmth. Every shadow cast on the sand was a testament to his physical presence. To look up was to look into the face of the sovereign. This connection created a society where the celestial and the terrestrial were inextricably linked. The health of the king was the brilliance of the sun. His anger manifested as the searing heat wave. His pleasure was found in the bountiful harvest. There was a profound intimacy in this belief. The Egyptians did not feel dwarfed by the sun. They felt seen by it.
They understood that their king was navigating the sky for them, steering the Manjet through the treacherous currents of the upper atmosphere to ensure that time itself did not stop. The Manjet moved with a steady, rhythmic grace, mirroring the slow and deliberate pace of a pharaoh processing through his capital city. Along the banks of the Nile, the people performed rituals that mirrored the actions of the gods on the boat. As the priests offered incense in the temples, they believed the smoke rose to join the clouds that trailed behind Ra's vessel. The entire geography of Egypt was seen as a reflection of this heavenly voyage. The Nile was the earthly twin of the celestial river, and the movement of the sun from east to west was the blueprint for all human travel and transition. In this era of the living sun, every heartbeat was synchronized with the rowing of the divine oarsman, and every sunrise was a personal visit from a king who loved his people enough to light their world with his own flesh.
But even a king whose body is composed of the very essence of light cannot outrun the slow, grinding gears of eternity. As the cycles of the sun repeated through countless millennia, the vigor that once defined the Creator began to soften, then to fray at the edges. The divinity that had felt so permanent, so unshakable to the people of the Nile, was beginning to experience the one thing a god should never know: the creeping shadow of decay. Ra was growing old. His skin, once a polished mirror of pure gold, took on the matte finish of ancient parchment. His steps, which once shook the firmament with the rhythm of creation, grew heavy and uncertain. The god who had spoken the world into existence now found his voice trembling, his words occasionally lost to the wind. Most humiliating of all, the divine fluids of his body, the very nectar that should have stayed within the vessel of a deity, began to leak. As he walked across the earth, his head would loll, and the saliva of the Creator would drip from his chin, falling onto the common dust of the mortal ground. Among the younger generation of gods, there was one who watched this decline with more than just pity. Isis was a figure of immense intellect and even greater ambition. She did not merely see a grandfather losing his grip on the world. She saw an opportunity to secure the future of her lineage. She knew that Ra's power did not solely reside in his light or his solar disk, but in his secret name, a name that no other being in the cosmos knew, not even the other gods. This name was the key to his absolute authority over the laws of nature. To possess it was to possess the blueprints of existence itself. Isis understood that as long as Ra held this secret, her son, Horus, would always be a subordinate. She decided that the time had come for the old king to pass his mantle, whether he intended to or not. She did not use a weapon of bronze or stone. Instead, she used the god's own frailty against him. Following him in secret as he took his daily walk through the fields of Egypt, she waited for the moment his strength wavered. When the divine spittle fell from his lips and struck the soil, Isis moved. She gathered the damp earth, mixing the king's own essence with the dust of the world he had made. With her clever hands, she kneaded the mud, shaping it not into a person or a helpful spirit, but into a serpent, a venomous snake born of the god's own life force. She did not breathe life into it with a blessing, she animated it with a command. She placed the creature in the tall grass along the path where Ra walked every morning, hiding it where the golden light of the sun would fail to reveal its coiled form. The next morning, as the sun rose to begin its journey, the aging king moved through the greenery, leaning on his staff. He did not notice the movement in the shadows. The serpent, fueled by the very divinity it had been crafted from, struck with a speed that bypassed the god's fading reflexes. Its fangs sank deep into his ankle. This was no ordinary poison. It was a toxin born of his own flesh, designed to bypass his celestial defenses.
For the first time since the beginning of time, the Sun King felt a pain he could not command to stop. A cry tore from his throat, a sound so terrible that it echoed from the heights of the heavens to the depths of the underworld. The other gods, hearing the scream of their patriarch, rushed to his side. They found him shaking, his golden skin turning a sickly pale hue, and his eyes clouded with an agony that threatened to extinguish the light of the day. Ra called out to his children, his voice cracking like dry wood. He told them he had been bitten by something he did not create, a thing that moved in the dark, and that the fire within him was being consumed by a cold, searing ice. He begged for a cure, for a spell, for anything to draw the venom from his veins. The gods searched their knowledge, but they were powerless. The poison was a part of Ra himself, and they could not fight the Creator with the magic he had given them. Only Isis stood silent, watching the sweat pour down his face. Finally, she stepped forward. She spoke with a voice that was soft, full of feigned concern, yet underpinned by a terrifying resolve. She told him that she could heal him, she could draw the serpent's bite from his blood and restore his glory, but only if he revealed his true name. The king hesitated. To give away his name was to give away his soul. He tried to deflect, listing his many titles. He claimed to be the maker of heaven and earth, the joiner of mountains, the creator of the great flood. He called himself Khepri in the morning, Ra at noon, and Autumn in the evening. But Isis only shook her head. She knew these were public names, labels used by the priests and the common folk. They carried no power over the fundamental forces of the universe. The poison surged, turning his breath into a series of ragged gasps. The world began to dim as the sun god's heart faltered. The agony became an unbearable weight, a mountain of lead pressing down on his chest. In his desperation, as the fire of the venom reached his very core, Ra succumbed. He realized that the era of his absolute solitude was over. He commanded the other gods to step back, leaving only Isis to hear his final secret. In a whisper that vibrated through the atoms of the air, the name passed from the heart of the king into the heart of the goddess. It was a transfer of energy so profound that it shifted the balance of the entire pantheon. With the name in her possession, Isis spoke the words of power. The venom was commanded to leave the limbs of the god, and the pain vanished as quickly as it had arrived. Ra was saved, but he was no longer the same. The vulnerability he had shown could never be forgotten, and the secret that had once been his alone now resided in the mind of the mother of Horus. The transition had begun. The sun would still rise, and the voyage would continue, but the king now shared the throne of his own existence with the cleverness of the moon and the strength of the heirs who would follow in his wake.
The shared sovereignty of the sun and the moon brought a new rhythm to the world, a balance that allowed the cycles of time to take hold. Yet, even for a being born of the primeval waters, time carries a heavy weight. As the ages passed, the physical form of the great creator began to show the marks of his long reign. His bones, once the source of all structure, turned to silver. His flesh, which had once glowed with the radiant heat of the first dawn, took on the cold, hard sheen of polished gold. His hair grew long and white, then darkened to the deep midnight blue of lapis lazuli. For the first time since the beginning of the universe, Ra appeared fragile. He walked the dusty paths of the earth as an old man, leaning heavily on a staff, his footsteps growing shorter and his breath more labored with every passing season. The humans, those creatures born from the very tears Ra had wept in his youth, watched their king with a new and dangerous perspective. They saw the tremors in his hands and the way his eyes sometimes clouded with the fog of antiquity. They forgot the warmth he provided, They forgot the gift of life itself. In the shadow of the great monuments and within the privacy of their homes, a rebellion began to stir. They believed that because the king was old, his power was gone. They mocked his frailty in secret songs and plotted to overthrow the divine order, thinking they could rule themselves without the oversight of the sun. They whispered that the sun was setting on the age of the gods and that the era of man had arrived to claim the throne. Ra was old, but he was not blind. He felt the shift in the hearts of his children. He heard the murmurs carried on the desert wind and saw the defiance in the way they turned their backs to his light. Deeply wounded by this betrayal, he summoned a secret council of the elder gods. He gathered those who had existed before the world began, calling them to his palace in the hidden hours of the night so that no mortal might overhear their deliberations. He spoke to Noon, the personification of the primeval abyss, and told him of the uprising. Ra asked for guidance, his voice trembling not with age, but with a father's grief and a king's cold fury. The Ancient Ones gave their counsel without hesitation. They told Ra that his authority must remain absolute if the cosmos were to survive the encroaching chaos. They advised him to release his eye, the burning feminine aspect of his own power, to strike down those who had dared to conspire against him. This eye was not a passive observer. It was a weapon of pure solar fire. It took the form of Hathor, the goddess of grace and beauty, but as she descended from the celestial heights to the parched earth, her nature shifted violently. The lady of song and dance was replaced by a creature of nightmares. She became Sekhmet, the powerful one, the lioness who tramples the wicked, the one before whom all life trembles. The slaughter that followed was swift and terrible. The desert sands, once golden, were stained a deep, saturated crimson. The air grew thick and heavy with the metallic scent of death.
Sekhmet found a dark, ecstatic joy in the hunt. She reveled in the chaos, her golden eyes reflecting the carnage she created. The rebellion was crushed in a matter of hours, but the goddess did not stop. The taste of blood had awakened a hunger within her that could not be satisfied. She had become a force of nature that threatened to consume every living soul on the face of the earth. From his high throne, Ra watched the devastation and felt a sudden, piercing regret. He had wanted to punish his children, not erase them. He saw the empty villages and the rivers choked with the fallen, and he knew that if Sekhmet were allowed to continue her rampage until the next dawn, there would be no one left to tend the fires or offer the morning prayers. He called out to her, commanding her to cease, but the goddess was deaf to his voice. She was lost in a trance of violence, her heart beating with the frantic rhythm of the kill. Ra realized that force alone would not stop the lioness. He needed to use the very cleverness that he had recently bestowed upon the moon. He sent swift messengers to the cataracts of the Nile to gather vast quantities of red ochre. He summoned the high priests and the women of the Sun Temple, ordering them to work through the night. They brewed 7,000 jars of strong barley beer, and into this vast reservoir they mixed the red pigment. By the time the first light of dawn touched the horizon, they had created a lake of liquid that looked exactly like the blood Sekhmet so desperately craved. They poured this mixture over the fields where the goddess intended to resume her hunt. When Sekhmet arrived, her mouth dry and her spirit eager for more death, she saw the shimmering red expanse. Thinking it was the lifeblood of 1,000 victims, she laughed and began to drink. She drank with a ferocity that matched her killing spree, gulping down the heavy crimson liquid until her belly was full. The alcohol took hold of her divine senses. Her vision clouded, and the fire in her limbs began to fade. The lioness stumbled, her roars turning into low, contented purrs. She fell into a deep sleep under the morning sun, and as she dreamed, the bloodlust drained away. When she finally woke, the transformation was complete. She was Hathor once more, gentle and serene, unaware of the terror she had unleashed. Humanity had been saved, but the world had changed forever. The bond of trust between the Creator and his creation was shattered. Ra looked down at the survivors and felt a profound, weary distance. He no longer wished to live among the mortals who had mocked him, nor did he wish to witness the frailty of a world he had nearly destroyed. He sought a way to leave the physical earth without abandoning his duty to the cosmos. He called upon Nut, the goddess of the sky, who took the form of a magnificent celestial cow. Ra climbed onto her back, and she began to rise. She lifted him higher than the highest mountains, higher than the reach of any human hand. As she ascended, her body stretched to cover the entire world. Her 4 legs became the pillars that held up the heavens, and her belly, decorated with the stars of the night, became the firmament. This was the final separation of the divine and the mundane.
Ra established his court in the high places, creating a kingdom of light that was far removed from the dust and the blood of the earth. He gave the governance of the land to the younger gods and the pharaohs who would serve as his intermediaries. From that day forward, the gods would no longer walk among men as neighbors. They would be distant powers, glimpsed in the flash of lightning or the steady transit of the sun. Ra had ascended to his eternal voyage, leaving humanity to navigate the shadows of a world where the Creator was now a king in exile, watching from the infinite silence of the stars.
The fading light of day is not merely an ending, but a profound transformation of the divine. As the golden disk dips below the western horizon, the brilliance that once defined the sky dissolves into the bruised purples and deep indigos of the twilight. This is the Akhet, the threshold where the living world touches the hidden one, or horizon that acts as a bridge between the physical and the metaphysical. Ra does not simply disappear from the world, he changes vessels. The Manjet, the bright boat of the morning that sailed through the blue expanse of the sky, is left behind at the gate of the west. In its place, a sturdier, more somber craft emerges from the thickening fog of the dusk. This is the Mescatet, the evening boat, built to withstand the crushing pressures and the chaotic currents of the subterranean river that flows beneath the feet of the living. But the greatest change occurs within the God himself. The radiant, all-powerful Creator who governed the sky with an iron will is gone. In his place sits Auf-Ra, which translates literally to the flesh of Ra. He has become a corpse god, a heavy, static entity that carries the weight of the day's work and the stillness of the grave. His light is no longer a blinding flare, but a smoldering ember contained within a shroud. He is a king in transit, traveling through his own burial, seeking a rejuvenation that is never guaranteed. He carries with him the seeds of the next dawn, but they are buried deep within his weary, aging form, protected by the very gods who once served him in the heights of the noon sky. Below the horizon lies the Duat, a landscape that defies the logic of the surface. To the ancient Egyptians, this was not a simple underworld of punishment, but a complex, multi-layered topography of water, fire, and stone. It is a world where the geography shifts with every passing hour, a place where the laws of physics are replaced by the laws of magic and ritual. We know the intimate details of this terrifying passage through the funerary texts left behind in the silent, painted chambers of the Valley of the Kings. The Amduat, or the Book of that which is in the underworld, serves as a survival guide for the son, mapping the caverns and the rivers he must navigate. It provides the names of the entities he will encounter, for in the Duat, to know a name is to have power over the thing named. Beside it stands the Book of Gates, where every hour is guarded by a massive portal and a guardian whose name must be spoken with perfect precision if passage is to be granted. These are not merely stories, they are the architectural blueprints of the afterlife. The journey is divided into 12 distinct hours, each a station in a cosmic drama that determines the fate of the universe. The first hour is the entry, a gradual descent where the sun is greeted by the souls of the dead who wait in the shadows for a single glimpse of the passing light. For these spirits, the arrival of the Mescatet is the only moment of reprieve in an eternity of darkness. They cry out in joy as the boat passes, their voices echoing off the limestone walls of the first great cavern. But as the boat moves deeper, the atmosphere thickens. The air becomes heavy with the smell of silt and stagnant water. By the second and third hours, the landscape opens into the fertile fields of the underworld, known as the Werns. Here, the blessed dead tend to crops of grain that grow tall in the dim glow of the sun's aura. In these early hours, Ra acts as a judge and a provider, distributing land and life even as his own strength begins to flicker. By the middle hours, the fourth and fifth, the river narrows until it disappears entirely. The lush fields vanish, replaced by the sandy, jagged deserts of Rostau, the domain of the falcon-headed god Seker. Here, the Mescatet cannot sail on water. It must be transformed into a serpent or dragged by ropes across a landscape of fire and sharp stones. The silence here is absolute, broken only by the rhythmic chanting of the gods who pull the solar barge through the grit. This is the deepest point of the descent, where the sun is furthest from the world of the living and closest to the absolute void. The darkness here is a physical weight, pressing against the hull of the boat, trying to extinguish the last remaining spark of the divine flesh. It is in these depths that the true dangers reveal themselves. The Duat is populated by entities that loathe the light and seek to return the universe to its original state of chaos. Serpents with multiple heads, fire-breathing Dardians, and spirits of decay wait in the bends of the river. The most terrifying aspect of this journey is that Ra is vulnerable. In his state as Aufra, he is a passenger in his own fate, dependent on the protection of the deities who surround him. The goddess Mehen, a massive serpent of light, coils her protective body around his cabin, acting as a shield against the darkness. Thoth, the god of wisdom, and Horus, the defender, stand at the prow, using their voices and their weapons to ward off the encroaching shadows. They must fight back the creatures of the night using the power of Heka, or magic, weaving spells that keep the boat moving forward through the suffocating gloom. The passage is a race against time, a countdown that repeats every night. If the sun fails to reach the eastern horizon before the 12 hours conclude, the cosmos will unravel. The order of Ma'at will be replaced by the primordial chaos of the abyss. Every hour brings a new challenge, a new gate to unlock, and a new monster to overcome. The geography of the Duat is a reflection of the internal struggle for survival. It is a world of mirrors where the sun must face the reflection of his own mortality. As we move into the 6th hour, the midpoint of the night, the boat approaches the very heart of the underworld. The shadows grow longer, the threats more numerous, and the light of the corpse god grows dimmer with every league traveled. We are moving toward the moment where the voyage faces its greatest test, a confrontation that will decide if the morning will ever come again. The dimming light of the solar bark casts long, jagged shadows against the walls of the Duat, where the very air seems to thicken with a heavy, unnatural weight. We have reached the deepest hollow of the night, a place where the laws of the physical world begin to buckle and dissolve into the gray fog of the unknown. Here, the river of time stops its rhythmic flow. The transition from the 6th hour to the 7th is not merely a change in position, but a descent into the absolute zero of the Egyptian cosmos. The body of the sun god, once radiant and full of heat, is now a silent, heavy weight within the golden shrine. Outside the cabin, the atmosphere grows cold, not with the chill of winter, but with a suffocating absence of life. This is the threshold of the abyss, the territory of the great devourer. Apep is coming. He is the lord of the serpent coils, the ancient antagonist who existed before the first word of creation was ever spoken. To the people of the Nile, Apep was never a god to be worshipped, but a force to be feared and repelled. He is the personification of Isfet, the principle of chaos and unmaking. He does not want to rule the world, he wants to erase it. He is the anti-creation, a massive swirling void that seeks to swallow the sun and plunge every living thing back into the silent, dark waters of the primordial state that existed before time began. As the bark approaches the shifting sandbanks of the 7th hour, the water itself vanishes beneath the hull. The dry, scorched dust and the serpent rises. He is a coil of pure shadow, miles long, his body wide enough to block the horizon from end to end. A terrible, heavy silence falls over the divine retinue. Usually, the boat is a place of rhythmic chanting and cosmic harmony, but now the gods themselves are paralyzed. Apep's primary weapon is not found in his fangs or his crushing weight, but in his gaze. His eyes are terrifying gateways to the void. One by one, the protectors of Ra, Sia, the personification of the divine mind, and Hu, the personification of the creative word, fall into a deep catatonic trance. Their limbs become as heavy as lead. Their thoughts drift into a gray fog of apathy and despair. This is the hypnosis of the abyss. To look into the serpent's eyes is to lose the will to exist. It is a psychological assault that strips away the memory of the self, making the crew forget the shape of their own names and the purpose of their voyage. The entire machinery of the universe grinds to a halt as the crew becomes a collection of statues, unable to lift an oar or offer a prayer to the fading light. In this moment of total stagnation, when the heartbeat of the cosmos seems to falter, only one figure remains standing. He is the most controversial member of the pantheon, a god often feared for his temper and his association with the harsh, red deserts and the unpredictable fury of the storm. This is Seth. While the other gods represent order, stability, and the predictable cycles of the harvest, Seth is the wild card. He is the god of the foreign lands and the chaotic winds.
Because he carries a spark of that same wild, unpredictable energy within his own blood, he is the only being in the boat who can look directly into the eyes of the great serpent and not be consumed by the void. He is the iron wall standing between the light of creation and the hunger of the nothingness. Seth steps to the prow of the boat, his copper spear glinting with the last remaining embers of the sun's fading glow. He does not feel the paralyzing dread that has gripped his kin. Instead, he feels a familiar, searing rage. He knows that if the sun dies here, there is no tomorrow, no desert, and no storm. The struggle that follows is a clash of absolute opposites. The serpent strikes, its massive body coiling around the solar bark, trying to crush the very idea of light. The sound of its scales grinding against the hull is like the sound of mountains being pulverized. Seth meets the assault with a roar that echoes through the hollowed-out caverns of the underworld. He thrusts his spear into the cold, dark scales of the enemy, anchoring the boat against the pull of the abyss.
This is not a fight that can be won once and for all. It is a ritual of resistance that must be enacted every single night for eternity. Seth's strength is the strength of the survivor, the one who refuses to go quietly into the dark. He hacks at the coils, driving the beast back into the mud in the shadows. Blood flows from the beast, a dark, thick ichor that stains the sands of the Duat. For a brief window, the hypnosis is broken. The crew gasps, returning to their senses as the serpent recoils in agony, hissing with a sound like 1,000 dying fires. The spell of the void is lifted. The boat begins to move again, sliding over the wounded, thrashing body of the beast. Ra's light, though still faint and flickering, begins to pulse with a renewed, steady rhythm. The danger has not passed entirely, for a Pep cannot be truly killed. He can only be repelled and bound for a time. He is an eternal force, as constant as the sun itself, waiting in the shadows for the next night to fall. But for this hour, the void has been denied. Seth stands at the bow, his spear dripping, his eyes fixed on the path ahead. He has protected the core of existence, ensuring that the cycle of the universe continues for at least one more league. The silence of the abyss is replaced by the low, steady chant of the gods as they take up their oars once more, their voices rising to push the boat forward toward the eventual dawn. The path remains dangerous, but the greatest enemy has been faced, and the light still breathes.
The rhythmic dip of the oars eventually fades into a heavy, absolute silence. The solar bark drifts now, not through turbulent waters or past the cries of warring spirits, but into a space that feels like the very foundation of existence. This is the midnight hour, the sixth gate, where the journey reaches its spiritual nadir. Here, in the deepest hollow of the Duat, the air is thick with the scent of ancient earth and the stillness of things that have remained unchanged since the first moment of creation. The torches on the boat flicker with a different intensity, casting long, wavering shadows against walls carved with the secrets of the dead. We are no longer merely moving forward. We are descending into the heart of a cosmic secret. Standing at the center of this silent hall is the figure of Osiris. He is the lord of the silent land, the king who was broken and then made whole again through the love of Isis and the magic of Thoth. He sits upon a throne of basalt, his skin the color of fertile Nile silt, wrapped in the white linens of a mummy. He represents the ultimate stillness, the eternal corpse that holds the memory of every life ever lived. To the Egyptians, he was not a symbol of ending, but a symbol of endurance. He is the earth itself, the solid ground that waits beneath the feet of the living and the weight of the sky. As the boat of Ra approaches, a profound transformation begins to occur. Ra, the Ba, the living soul of the universe, does not merely pass by. He descends from the solar disk. In the iconography of the royal tombs, this is depicted as a bird with a human head or a ram-headed figure glowing with an inner fire. He is the active principle, the heat that stirs the seed in the ground, and the thought that sparks the mind. But after his long journey through the upper air and the dangerous upper reaches of the night, his energy is depleted. He is a sun that has spent its strength. He requires more than just rest. He requires a restoration of his very essence. The two gods meet, and the boundary between them begins to dissolve. This is the union that the ancient texts describe with a simple yet shattering phrase. Ra rests in Osiris, and Osiris rests in Ra. It is the moment where the soul and the body are no longer separate entities. The heat of the sun enters the cold stillness of the earth, and the stability of the earth grounds the wild, flickering energy of the sun.
It is a metaphysical circuit being completed. In this embrace, the sun is not just hidden, it is being recharged by the infinite reservoir of the past and the physical reality of the world. Think of the sun as a flame that needs fuel to continue burning. Osiris is that fuel. He is the accumulated power of all that has gone before. By merging with him, Ra gains access to the deep, chthonic power of the underworld. He breathes life back into the silent Lord, and in return, Osiris provides the anchor that allows Ra to be reborn. The Egyptians believed that without this midnight encounter, the sun would simply flicker out, leaving the world in a state of chaotic darkness. The entire structure of the universe depends on this specific, quiet meeting in the dark. This union redefines how we understand the concept of death.
In the Egyptian mind, death was not a departure to a far-off place, but a necessary phase of a larger cycle. Just as the grain must be buried in the dark soil to sprout anew, the sun must be buried in the body of Osiris to regain its morning vigor. The corpse of Osiris is the temple in which the light is housed and protected until it is strong enough to rise again. It is a reminder that life requires a foundation of stillness and that motion requires a period of absolute quietude. The theological weight of this moment is immense. It bridges the gap between the solar religion of the pharaohs and the funerary religion of the common people. In this chamber, the king and the peasant are the same, for every soul must eventually seek its own Osiris to find renewal. The walls of the sixth hour are crowded with the figures of the dead who have successfully reached this point. They stand in rows, their hands raised in adoration, witnessing the miracle of the great union. They are not mourning, they are participating in a triumph. They see the glow returning to the solar disk, a faint gold beginning to pulse within the deep violet of the midnight shadows. As the union reaches its peak, a surge of power ripples outward from the throne of Osiris. It travels through the water of the Duat, through the roots of the world, and into the hearts of those who wait for the morning. The Djed pillar, the symbol of stability and the backbone of Osiris, stands firm, acting as a lightning rod for this celestial energy. The light is no longer the fading amber of evening. It is a sharp, concentrated white, the seed of a new day. Ra prepares to return to his bark, but he is no longer the weary traveler who entered the chamber. He is infused with the primordial strength of the earth. The boat begins to move again, but the oarsmen pull with a renewed vigor, their movements synchronized with the newfound heartbeat of the sun. The silence of the sixth hour lingers behind them like a blessing. They leave the presence of Osiris, the king who remains in the dark so that the light may go free. The transition is subtle but definitive. The lowest point has been passed. The descent is over, and the long, arduous climb toward the eastern horizon has begun. The sun still has hours of darkness to navigate, and the shadow of the great serpent still looms in the distance, but the core of the mystery has been solved. The light has found its anchor, and the voyage continues, fueled by the eternal union of the soul and the stone. Everything that was lost has been found, and everything that was old is becoming new. The pulse of the morning is already beginning to beat deep beneath the skin of the world. The 12th hour of the night arrives not with a shout, but with a heavy, expectant suspension of breath. As the pulse quickens beneath the earth, the shadows of the Duat begin to stretch thin, losing their grip on the iron-cold air of the underworld. This is the liminal space, the jagged edge where the impossible meets the inevitable. Here, in the deepest hollows of the night, the great serpent Apep waits for his final opportunity to swallow the light. He is the embodiment of non-existence, a coiled weight of entropy that seeks to unmake the order of the stars. The conflict that occurs in these final moments of darkness is silent and total. It is not merely a battle of gods, but a struggle between the presence of being and the absolute void of nothingness. The water of the celestial river turns turbulent as the coils of the serpent thrash against the hull of the solar bark. The crew of the boat, the entities of order and the souls of the justified, stand firm at the prow. They do not fight for glory, but for the continuation of reality itself. The Egyptians understood that the sun does not rise simply because it must, it rises because it fought to do so. They called this conceptual anchor Zep Tepi, often translated as the first time. To the modern mind, the dawn is a predictable mechanical event, a cold result of planetary rotation and gravity. But to the ancients, this was a radical misunderstanding of the universe. For them, every single morning was a literal recreation of the world. Each sunrise was the first sunrise. The cosmos was not a clock wound up and left to run. It was a fragile miracle that had to be earned through the blood and will of the Sun King. If Ra failed, if his strength faltered for even a heartbeat, the sun would not appear, and the universe would fold back into the primordial, freezing waters of chaos. This means that every person waking up in the shadow of the Nile was a witness to a fresh creation. They did not live in a world that was finished. They lived in a world that was being reborn every 24 hours. As the darkness finally cracks under the pressure of the approaching light, the identity of the voyager begins to shift once again. Ra, who was the weary, ram-headed man of the evening and the hidden spirit of the midnight hours, now takes the form of Khepri, the solar scarab. There is a profound and gritty poetry in this choice of symbol. The beetle, which rolls its sphere of life through the dust and waste, becomes the engine of the morning. Khepri represents the potential that exists within decay and the power of transformation. Just as the beetle emerges from the earth, the sun is pushed upward from the horizon by a force of sheer, relentless labor. It is a slow, grinding ascent. The disk is heavy with the weight of all human history and the gravity of the dead, yet Khepri moves it with a quiet, rhythmic determination. The scarab does not ask for permission to exist. It simply works, rolling the fire of the sun out from the throat of the night and on to the threshold of the sky. The serpent Apep is not killed, for chaos cannot be destroyed, but he is bound and subdued. He is forced back into the cracks of the earth, his scales charred by the radiance he tried to extinguish.
The victory is won, but it is a temporary one, for the cycle demands that the struggle be repeated. This is the heart of the Egyptian soul, the acceptance that order requires constant maintenance. Ma'at, the cosmic balance, is not a gift, it is a task. As the bark of millions of years clears the final gate of the underworld, the transition is complete. The soul has survived the stone, and the morning has broken the grip of the tomb. The colors of the sky begin to bleed into the world, transforming the gray silhouettes of the landscape into vibrant reality. First comes a bruised violet, then a burning ochre, and finally a gold so bright it feels like a physical touch upon the skin. When the first ray of light strikes the gilded capstones of the pyramids, it is more than just optics. It is a signal to the entire valley that the king is alive. The peasants in the fields, the priests in the sanctuaries, and the king in his palace all breathe in unison. They are the beneficiaries of a cosmic war that they did not see, but whose outcome determines their existence. The heat begins to bake the mud of the riverbanks, and the birds in the papyrus reeds begin their morning chorus, celebrating the fact that the void has been held at bay for one more day. This is the emergence. It is the moment when the hidden becomes manifest. The Sun King has traveled through the belly of the earth, through the halls of judgment, and through the jaws of the abyss,
only to return with the same fire he carried at the beginning. He is older, wiser, and more scarred, but he is victorious. As the solar disk clears the horizon and hangs suspended over the eastern desert, the world is new. The memories of the previous day are washed clean by the brilliance of the present. The voyage is not a circle, but a spiral, rising higher with every victory. In this light, the stone of the monuments seems to glow from within, reflecting the eternal truth that the Egyptians carved into every surface, that life is a journey through the dark, and that the dawn is the reward for those who refuse to be consumed by the night. The Sun King has returned, and with him the world begins its story all over again.
But even a cycle as old as the stars can be broken by the will of a single man. For nearly 2,000 years, the voyage of Ra remained the steady heartbeat of the Nile, a story told in the rising and setting of a billion suns. Then, in the mid-14th century before the Common Era, the horizon shifted in a way that the priests of Heliopolis could never have predicted. Amenhotep IV ascended the throne, and with him came a theological storm that threatened to extinguish the very fire of the ancient myths. This was the Amarna period, a brief but violent departure from the gods of the ancestors, where the light of the sun was stripped of its soul. He did not just demand a change in ritual, he demanded a total reconstruction of reality. He turned his back on the shadowed, incense-heavy halls of Karnak and the hidden wisdom of the priesthood. In his eyes, the complexity of Ra, his many forms as the morning scarab or the evening ram, was no longer necessary. He stripped away the falcon's head, the solar boat, and the nightly battle against the great serpent. He reduced the magnificent, multi-layered identity of the sun to a singular, sterile image, the Aten. This was the physical disk itself, a flat circle with radiating arms ending in tiny hands offering life only to the royal family. By doing this, Akhenaten did more than change a state religion. He attempted to kill the collective imagination of his people. The rich stories of the underworld, the perilous journey through the 12 hours of darkness, and the epic struggle of the gods to keep the world from falling into chaos were silenced. The temples of Ra and Amun were shuttered, their names chiseled off the stone by workmen who feared the very gods they were erasing. The sun became a distant, unapproachable thing of physics and blinding heat, devoid of the personality and fatherly warmth that had guided the Egyptian spirit for generations. The eternal voyage was grounded, replaced by a cold mathematical certainty that left the common person standing in the shadows of a world they no longer recognized. The landscape changed to reflect this new harsh light. The king moved the capital to a virgin site in the desert, building a city of white stone and open-air altars where the sun beat down without mercy or mediation. Here, there were no dark sanctuaries to hide the mysteries of the sun's rebirth. There was only the disk and the king who claimed to be its only prophet. This was the ultimate heresy, the idea that the sun did not need its stories and that the people did not need their myths. But a sun without a story is merely a star, and the people of Egypt had lived by the story for too long to let it fade into the sand. The experiment was short-lived, collapsing under the weight of its own isolation. Upon Akhenaten's death, the old world rushed back in like a flood tide returning to a parched bank. The young king Tutankhamun, under the guidance of the traditionalists, began the massive work of healing the theological fracture. The city of the sun disk was abandoned to the desert winds, and the name of the heretic king was struck from the lists of rulers as if he had never existed. But the sun that returned to the temples of Thebes was not quite the same one that had been hidden.
It had emerged stronger, more complex, and synthesized with the power of the hidden wind. This was the era of Amun-Ra,
the king of gods. The fusion of Amun and Ra represented the ultimate theological achievement of the new kingdom. Amun was the hidden one, the invisible breath of the universe, while Ra was the visible glory. Together, they formed a deity that was both transcendent and immanent, a god who could be felt in the wind and seen in the light. This new supreme power was no longer just a figure in a boat. He was the source of all existence, a being so vast that all other gods were seen as his limbs or his secret names. He merged with the warrior gods to become the falcon of the horizons, and with the creator gods to become the architect of the human soul. This restoration cemented the sun's position as the absolute center of the Egyptian universe. The complexity of this new solar theology allowed the people to see the sun in every facet of their lives: the growth of the grain, the flooding of the river, and the very breath in their lungs. The heresy had tried to simplify the sun, but it only succeeded in proving that the light of Ra was too grand to be contained in a single disk. He was a god of 1,000 faces, a king who had survived the greatest challenge to his throne, not with a sword, but by becoming everything at once. The voyage was back on course, and its destination was now nothing less than the preservation of eternity itself.
But eternity, as the Egyptians conceived it, was never a static destination. It was a cycle of constant motion. Even the most powerful empire in the ancient world could not halt the ticking of a clock that measured time in millennia rather than hours. As the voyage of Ra continued, the landscape of human belief began to shift beneath the sun's steady gaze. The grand temples of Karnak and Heliopolis, once humming with the rhythmic chants of thousands, eventually found themselves caught in the long, creeping shadows of a changing world. The golden age of the pharaohs, where the king was the literal son of the sun, started to fray at the edges, giving way to an era of external influence and internal doubt. The arrival of the Greeks and later the Romans did not initially extinguish the solar flame. Instead, they attempted to merge their own gods with the solar majesty of the Nile, creating hybrids like Serapis. But the true shift came with the arrival of a different kind of light from the East. New ideologies and faiths emerged that had no room for a pantheon of animal-headed deities. As Christianity spread across the Mediterranean, the solar disk was gradually replaced by the cross. The last priests of Philae, clinging to their ancient rituals on a lonely island in the Nile, watched as their sacred hieroglyphs became a dead language. By the time the call to prayer echoed across the sands of Giza under the banner of Islam, the formal cult of Ra had officially retreated from the public squares and into the silence of history. Yet, a god who represents the sun does not die simply because his temples are closed. Ra did not vanish, he transformed. He became a ghost in the machine of Western civilization, a silent partner in our architectural and spiritual evolution. Look at the skyline of any major world capital today. The obelisk, that petrified ray of sunshine meant to tether the earth to the sky, stands tall in Sint and EC. These are not just stone pillars, they are fingerprints of an ancient solar obsession that we have never truly outgrown. The Eye of Ra, once a weapon of divine destruction and a shield of protection, eventually found its way onto the back of the American dollar bill and into the secret lexicon of modern fraternal orders. It remains our most potent shorthand for the idea of an all-seeing providence, a gaze that penetrates the darkness of human ignorance. In the smoky workshops of Renaissance alchemists and the quiet studies of Enlightenment thinkers, the solar wisdom of Egypt was treated as the ultimate prize. They saw in the sun disk a map for the human soul's journey toward enlightenment, a process of turning leaden thoughts into golden wisdom. Even today, in the fast-paced digital age, the imagery of the Sun King persists with surprising strength. It surfaces in our cinema, our art, and our persistent fascination with the occult. We find ourselves drawn back to the desert sands, searching for a meaning that feels more visceral and grounded than the sterile logic of the modern era. The solar disk has become a universal icon for the source of life itself, a symbol that transcends language, geography, and time. We might not offer blood sacrifices or chant hymns in the forgotten tongue of the Middle Kingdom, but every time we look at the morning horizon with a sense of wonder, we are participating in a ritual as old as the first dynasty.
The decline of the formal religion was merely the shedding of a skin. The essence of the Sun King remains woven into the way we perceive power, divinity, and the passage of time. The voyage that began at the dawn of the world has no ending, only a series of renewals. Ra is unique among the gods of antiquity because his physical body is visible to us every single day. He is the only deity whose presence is a physical certainty, providing the energy that fuels every cell in our bodies and every breeze that moves across the earth. He is the engine of the biosphere and the clock by which we measure our lives. Empires rise and crumble into dust, languages are forgotten, and entire civilizations are swallowed by the shifting dunes of the Sahara, but the sun remains constant. As long as the dawn breaks the horizon and pushes back the cold, hungry grip of night, the story of Ra is being retold. He is the first hero, the eternal traveler, and the most enduring protagonist in the history of our species. We are all children of that original light, and as we look toward tomorrow, we realize that the voyage of the sun is our voyage too. Ra is not a relic of a dead past, but a living part of our present, rising again and again, making the story of the sun the only story that truly never ends.